All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank, our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Shvat. Right, Baruch Hashem, good Chodesh. For the month of Shvat, Mrs. Selma Woolf for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month with immense gratitude for the refuos from Hashem and the merit of a refuah for all of those in need, and the zchus of our brave soldiers, and the zchus of the return of all of our hostages. Our Daf Yomi share sponsor today, Matt and Diane, marks in memory of Matt's mother, Sora, Pesha, Bas, Moshe, Mordechai, zechus. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the Neshama will have an aliya and the family in Neshama. And of course, we dedicate all of Maseches Bava Kamma, Li'ilui Nishmas, Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush, Hashem Yikom Damo. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, his Neshama will have an aliya and his family in Neshama. Also with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful daf ahead of us, a great way to start in Eretz Hashem, the new month of Shvat Ha'ba'alinu L'tov, with a beautiful daf of Gemara. Today's daf is Ayin 70, and we are picking up on the top of Ayin 78, top line. Amin Aridoi. So then Aridoi to the following. So it's a couple of really very interesting technical halachas, but not like boring technical, riveting technical. So here we go. Amin Aridoi. Lo kasvinon or chasa al taltali. Now, this is interesting. We do not write an orchasa. Now, what's an orchasa? Rashi says, top of the Daf, Harsha. So, we'll say, Shtar Harsha. Now, if that document sounds familiar, it's because we almost all of us do it at least once a year. So, Harsha is a power of attorney. The same way when we come to sell our chametz. So, you go ahead and you fill out what are called a Shtar Harsha, which empowers someone else to act on your behalf. So, that's an orchasa. Chas is a shtar shah, power of attorney. So then our Diane wrote as follows: you cannot go ahead and write a power of attorney document over movable property. Now, why not? And why not? This is very interesting. My time. What's the reason why I can't write the power of attorney over movable property? So the Gemara says, incredible. This all comes out to Rabbi Yochanan. We have been preoccupied with Rabbi Yochanan for the last 2 days. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, Gazav alone is Yai. But remember again, this is the famous position of Rabbi Yochanan. Reuven steals an object from Shimon. So now what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, and Shimon did not yet despair, right? Shimon did not give up hope of reclaiming the object. Shnehem einon yecholin lahakdish. Neither Reuven nor Shimon have the ability to be makdish the item. Why not? Zelafi she'enu shalo. So remember again, Reuven can't do it because the object doesn't belong to Reuven. Reuven is a thief. Zelafi she'enu bershuso. And of course, Shimon, because he is not in physical possession of the item. So what do you see from here? You see from here again, this is the position of Yochanan, that you cannot affect a change in status in an item that is not in your possession, either because you don't own it or because it's not in your physical possession. So therefore, along those same lines, the Naradom says something interesting. The Naradom said that halacha l'maisa, you cannot write a power of attorney. So if I go ahead and I have metaltalin, and let's say in the possession of someone else, and I want to empower Reuven to go ahead and collect those metaltalin, so then our Doim said, I can't go ahead and create a power of attorney, a shtar harsha. Why not? Because A, I don't have the item in my possession. I don't have that in my possession. And ultimately, again, and number two, because the shaliach doesn't have the item in his possession either. So halacha l'mayis again, based on Rabbi Yochanan, neither of us have the ability to really collect these metaltalin. Okay, Ike da'amri, an alternate version of this. Amrin aridoi lo kasvinan or chasa amataltali. So the Gemara says dekafre. The Gemara says, dekafre. So an alternate version of this. What's the alternate version? Then Aradom said you cannot go ahead and write a shtar harsha on metaltalin, the kafre. Now look at Rashi again. Rashi says over here, first I'll take a previous look at Rashi, Mishud Rabbi Yochanan, Tahoil ve'eno birshos habaylim, eno yachal lahaknoso l'shliach, hilchach im avad yachal lachsar v'litvoa miyad ha'ne'eman. So Rabbi said, this is actually very interesting. The Gemara says over here something fascinating. The Gemara says that the reason you can't write a shtar harsha on metaltalin is like this. We're going to see that the way a power of attorney works in halacha is that in order to give something, in order to vest someone with responsibility, you have to fully give over the item to them. So let's just essentially, if I want someone to act in my stead, they have to own the object as I would own the object. So therefore, again, within our Dharma saying like this, if I want to give Reuven over the ability to collect my metaltalin, that's in the possession of someone else, I have to effectively give him over title of those metaltalin. What's the problem? The problem over here is I don't have physical possession of those metaltalin. And based on Rabbi Yochanan, if you don't have physical possession of something, you cannot affect a change in status. I can't convey something over to you if I myself don't actually have possession of it. So it's an interesting idea because we're used to the concept of a power of attorney working that I don't have to give you over title, I just have to give you over, we'll call it certain rights over it. Kamma, the Gemara says, no, that's in fact not the case. Ikeda alternate version of this, Amin Ardom, then Ardom said as follows, Lo kasvinan or chasa amataltali de kafre. Ultimately, again, when can't you write the shtar sharabosai? When the party in question denies liability. Look at Rashi. It's really interesting. The kafre im tavi mafkid lineman bebezin v'kavrabo. We'll say, watch this. Let's say I claim Reuven, you owe me movable property, whatever it is. You owe me whatever the object is. Reuven denies the claim. Reuven denies the claim. So now that in this alternate version over there, Ardom said, I cannot create a shtar shah. I cannot create the power of attorney in this case. Why? Time of the kafre. Now I'll say the reason I can't do it sounds like is because Reuven is denying the claim. So the Gemara says, the mechse keshikra. Because I will say, if I'm claiming that Reuven owes me, I don't know, $1,000 worth of movable property, and Reuven's saying, no, I don't. So then to go ahead and create the power of attorney over this scenario looks a little bit strange. So the Gemara says, because it's mechse keshikra, that's why I can't create a power of attorney. Avalo kafre kasinan. But it sounds like over here that halacha l'maisa, had I not done that, right? Had Reuven not denied that claim, I would be able to go ahead and create that power of attorney. So both say, so two versions over here in the Nardoim. Version number one is you can't create a power of attorney over any object that is not in your possession. That's based on Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, version number two is you can't create the power of attorney over any claim that the other party is denying because it's mechse keshikra, looks like it's a lie. Okay, fine. What's the connection between this and our previous sugya? Rabbi Yochanan. All Rabbi Yochanan. Furthermore, the Nardoim said, Or chasad lo ksiv be zil don v'zachi v'apek l'nafshech les be mishasha. So we'll say, so now once we're on the topic of power of attorneys, and specifically the position of the Nardoim, we're adding in a couple of other interesting facts into this. The Nardoim said as follows, any rachasa, any shtar hasha, any power of attorney document that does not have the following lashon. I hereby, we'll say, here's the lashon of the power of attorney. I hereby empower Reuven. Zil don, go ahead and adjudicate. V'zachi, be successful. Va'apik l'nafshech, and acquire the proceeds for yourself. Less bei mashasha. Such a power of it, if it doesn't possess that lashon, then the power of attorney is meaningless. Others will say, what does this mean over here? The halacha is saying like this: in order for a power of attorney to work, essentially, we'll call it the attorney. I don't know if that's the right term, right? The person who I'm empowering has to essentially be standing in my place. I have to give him full rights as if he was me. That's why the lashon over here is, Reuven, go and adjudicate this case with Shimon on my behalf. Be successful, and all of the proceeds belong to you. Now, I will say, do I actually have intention that I want all of the proceeds from this litigation or from this situation to go to Reuven? The answer is no. I want it to come to me. So why do I give it this lashon? We'll say, so we're going to see that in order for Reuven to navigate a claim on my behalf with a party with whom I have a contractual relationship, Reuven has to have a seat at the table. If Reuven is just kind of acting as an intermediary third party, so Lamaisa again, let's say Shimon, who's the guy on the other end of the table over here, could say, I have nothing to do with you. My agreement is with Silber. not to do with you. So therefore, in order to go ahead and give Reuven power, the ability to operate on my behalf, he has to be vested with complete, almost like autonomy, as if he was me. We'll see here this interesting idea. So one more time. The Nardam say, any shtar harsha, any power of attorney that does not have written in it, don't Reuven, go and adjudicate this case. V'zochi, and be successful. V'apik l'nafshech, and keep the proceeds for yourself. Less be mashasha. Ultimately, again, it does not have any teeth. Why not? The Gemara says, "My taima mishum do'amar leheich lav bal dvarim didiat." Because again, the other party could say, "I had nothing to do with this." Let me just illustrate this again. So let's say I go ahead and I have a claim against Shimon for $1,000. And I want Reuven to go ahead and take care of this for me. I want to give him power of attorney. So now the Gemara is suggesting over here that power of attorney has to essentially say, I am hereby essentially giving this over to Reuven. Reuven, you go and adjudicate this, and you keep the $1,000. Even though it's not my intention that Reuven keeps the $1,000. Reuven's going to give it back to me. But Lamaisa, if I don't give Reuven that responsibility, then what's going to happen? When Reuven goes and calls up Shimon and tries to adjudicate the case, Shimon's going to say, take a hike. I have nothing to do with you. Who are you? If Silber has a problem, let him come to me because he's the one with whom I have the transactional relationship with. I don't have any relationship with you. Now, when Reuven takes out the shtar harsha, and he says, yes, you do have a relationship with me. Why? Because Lamaisa, Silber gave me over complete rights in this transaction. Suddenly, again, Reuven is a party to the transaction. It's fascinating. So the Gemara goes like there. Amar Abai says, V'kasiv bei, lemechza u'l'shlish u'l'reviyah, migo de mishtay dina apalga, mishtay dina akula. So Abai says, okay, brother say the truth is, even if I don't give over Reuven the entire proceeds from the transaction, but I say to him, Reuven, do me a favor, go and adjudicate this on my behalf, and I'm going to give you 50% of the proceeds, or 30% of the proceeds. That works as well. Once he has a vested interest in part of the proceeds, that enables him to go ahead and operate on my behalf. So very interesting. Look at Rashi. So even if I say, Reuven, here's the power of attorney, go operate on my behalf, and you could keep 50% of the proceeds. That works fine. That works fine as well, because again, the idea of Moshe is that, and this is actually quite fascinating, that in general, if I dispatch someone to go ahead and let's say adjudicate a disputed transaction with a party with whom I entered into a contractual obligation, that party could say to the power of attorney guy, I have nothing to do with you, right? Go away. I'm not talking to you about this. My transactional relationship was with Silber. Once I go ahead, Abai says the way to circumvent that is give Reuven, who's my power of attorney guy, give Reuven an ownership interest in even part of the proceeds. Once he has an ownership interest, then he has the right to adjudicate this with the other party involved. Fascinating idea. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, fine, Amra Meimar says, Itafis lo mafkinan minei. So I'll say this is interesting. So ultimately, again, if it turns out that we'll call Reuven is the... So I'll say, let's just go with what we have over here so far. So far there are 4 pieces that are mentioned. 2 by the Naradim, right? So number 1 by the Naradim ultimately is that you can't create a power of attorney over something that's not in your possession. That's number 1, right? Number two, good. The Ikadamri was ultimately, again, you can't create the power of attorney over something that the other party totally denies. Good. Number 3, ultimately, again, for a power of attorney to work, what do you call the guy with whom you give the power of attorney to? The attorney? Agent. Good, agent, right? What was it? Attorney in fact. Is that the correct term? Attorney in fact. Good. So attorney in fact, right? So we'll say, number three, ultimately, the attorney in fact is only vested with authority if he stands to benefit from this transaction. Right? I don't know if that works that way legally, but at least in the Gemara is saying like that. Otherwise, the other party to this transaction could say to him, go away. And number 4, Abaye says, even if I don't give the attorney, in fact, the full proceeds, but I just give him a part of the proceeds, that's enough to allow him to navigate. Okay, fascinating. So the Gemara says another fact, number 5. So Amar Meimar said, "Itafis lo mafkinon minei." That both say this is actually interesting. Let's say I appoint Reuven as this attorney, in fact, and he goes in and he seizes the property. We do not extract it from him. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. V'itafis shliach mishel ne'eman lo mafkinon minei afagav lo ksiv be'apik lenafshech lishnach yuna v'itafis shliach mammon shotzi v'ikva li'atzmo lo mafkinon minei kach matzasi kasa b'tshuva sagona v'ze'ikar. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. What's interesting is, as much as the nature of this relationship is that I appoint Reuven as this attorney, what was it? Agent in... attorney in fact, or agent. Good. I appoint Reuven as this agent, right? I appoint Reuven as this agent, and Reuven, let's say, doesn't give it back to me. Let's say he goes in and he keeps it. Technically speaking, you can't really extract it. In other words, I will say, in halacha, this whole power of attorney really only works with someone with whom you implicitly trust, who's actually going to carry out the agency and give you back the item. Because technically speaking, if the agent chooses to keep it for himself, we can't really extract it. Because you're supposed to remember, again, in halacha, the whole way that power of attorney works is essentially this guy becomes me. The agent becomes me. I'm really giving over the claim in its entirety to him, because otherwise in halacha, he doesn't really have the authority to go ahead and really collect. So really fascinating. So if it turns out that he decides to exploit the situation a little bit and keep the object for himself, I don't really have too much recourse. Okay, the Gemara of Rav Ashi Amar, Kevan de Kasile Kol de Misani Mendina Kabila Salai Shliach Shavya. So this is interesting. Rav Ashi says you could create the power of attorney situation even in a different situation. If I go ahead and I write in a shtar, Reuven, I hereby empower you to go ahead and collect this debt or collect this object, and I write in there the lashon of any expenses that you incur, I hereby take upon myself. That also creates power of attorney. Even Rav Ashi is bringing down over here that halacha l'maisa, even if I don't explicitly write, you hereby stand in my stead, or I give you the right to collect all of this, but you just write a lashon of all the expenses you incur are upon me. That's also power of attorney. Look at Rashi. Kevin the kasek habila salai al moshliach shavya hilchach itafis mafkinon minei lishna Kamma nami itafis mishal ne'amam. Fine. Let's go back there. Simar says as follows. Vikadami. Others say shutfa shavye. Others saying no. If you write that lashon of Reuven, I hereby ask you to go ahead and collect this whatever from Shimon, right? And I agree to cover your expenses. That's not power of attorney. Rather, what is that? That's shutfus. That's a partnership. So the Gemara says, Lamai nafkamina. What's nafkamina between a power of attorney and a shutfus? Lemitvas palga. Ultimately, because obviously power of attorney. So technically speaking, the understanding is, as much as I'm giving the agent the full rights to collect, but Lamaisa, the assumption is giving me back the money. As opposed to a shutfus, a partnership with the understanding from the beginning, ultimately is that what? So we're going 50-50. The halacha and I both say the halacha is that in this kind of case where you write the lashon of, I hereby agree to pick up all of your expenses, that's not a lashon of power of attorney, but rather that is a lashon of shlichus, of agency. So I both say, so how do we manage this? Because this is actually really quite interesting in terms of in halacha, how do you create the power of attorney? So listen to this. So the Rambam writes in Hilchos Shluchin, Perik Gimel Halacha Aleph. Listen to this quickly. Misha haisel karka tachas yad echad oshelo metaltalin b'kadon v'ratzalaso shaliach ladun imzeh ulahotzi hakarka oapi kadon mitachas yado. So we'll say, I just want to point out, just to frame the case. When are you creating a power of attorney? When are you creating a power of attorney? So remember again, a shlichus is a case where I just need someone to execute something on my behalf, right? This is different because over here, we're getting into adjudication, right? Reuven owes me $1,000 of land, of metal. It doesn't make a difference. And Reuven's going to contest it. I'm going to need someone to adjudicate this on my behalf. The problem is, if I just make Reuven a shaliach and Reuven shows up in Beis Din, what is Shimon going to say? Who are you? I'm not talking to you. You have nothing to do with this. So therefore, in order to prevent Shimon from doing that, we need a stronger relationship that essentially makes Ruvain like me. Ruvain is me when he walks into Beis Din. That's where a power of attorney comes in. That's the chilek between shlichos, even though we say shlucho shel adam kimoso, that your agent is like yourself, but that's fine. That's vis-a-vis me and the agent. But Lamaisa, regarding another party, the other party, right? Remember, Reuven walks into Beis Din as my shaliach, and Shimon says, "Who are you? I'm not talking to you. You have nothing to do with this." So we need a strong relationship. That's where power of attorney comes in. So how do you do it? Hari kosiv lo harsha v'tzarech liknos miado shehir shava omer lo don uzechei v'hotzi la'atzmecha kiyotzi be'inyan amelu. So this is how the Rambam paskins. In order ultimately, again, for a power of attorney to work, to vest Ruvain with the power to adjudicate this case on my behalf, and to force Shimon to deal with Ruvain, I actually have to give over the potential proceeds of this case to Ruvain. Because what I'm saying makes sense. Right now when Ruvain walks into Beis Din, and right Shimon says, "Who are you? Who are you?" What does Ruvain say? Who am I? I am now the guy who has the ownership interest in this disputed claim. That's Shalom Aleichem, right? That's who I am. That's who I am. And now Ruvain stands to gain or to lose, ultimately again in this proceeding. Without that, Ruvain doesn't have a seat at the table. Okay, so there's more of an kasav lo eino yachal lo don imo mipnei she'omer lo eina tabal dini. So right, the Rambam says if you don't create a power of attorney like this, then ultimately again Shimon could say to Ruvain, "I have nothing to do with you." So we'll say it's just interesting that from the Rambam. Now again, to point out, we do have other types of powers of attorney. Like for example, when it comes to chametz, so again, we write a power of attorney, that's shtar harsha. So again, there's different ways that shtar harsha works. According to some, it literally gives over to the Rav, the ownership over your chametz. Others say, no, it really just gives over just the ability to operate. But that's because, remember, we'll say, in chametz it's different. Why is chametz different? Right? No one is objecting to this, right? Remember again, I will say, the challenge over here, the reason, I just want to point out, you could have a power of attorney that just works as an agency, right? As long as what? As long as there's no one disputing anything on the other end. So I want Ruvain to execute something on my behalf, something transactional on my behalf, and there's no one contesting that. Okay, so I don't have to go through all of this. Essentially, I could just create a shlichus. This is coming up in a situation where there's an opposing party, right? I have a claim against Shimon. Shimon's denying the claim, or Shimon's upset about the game, or disputing some aspect of the claim. I need Ruvain to operate on my behalf. So the halacha is saying, in that case, a simple shlichus is not going to do, because Shimon could refuse to speak to Ruvain. It's only if Ruvain literally becomes me, then Shimon has no choice but to deal with him. How does Ruvain become me? By essentially me giving over the transaction in its entirety over to him. Now he has a right to adjudicate. Okay, just a really fascinating idea. Mishnah. Ganav api shnayim v'tavach u'machar apiyem. Here we go. Back to now, now we're going to focus a little bit more, remember again, on tvicha mechira. What's tvicha mechira? I steal and slaughter, or I should say like this, I steal and sell or slaughter an animal. Specifically, again, a sheep or an ox. The halacha is arba v'chamisha. You have to pay 4 to 5 times penalty payment. 4 times for the sheep, 5 times for the ox. Says the Gemara, Ganav api shnayim b'tavach u'machar apiyem. So let's say, so now here's the case. I go ahead and I steal the animal, and 2 witnesses see me. 2 witnesses see me. And let's say again, it's the same witnesses who see me steal, and the same witnesses who see me slaughter/sell. O api shnayim acherim. Or I will say, for that matter, again, 2 witnesses see me steal, and another 2 witnesses, separate 2 witnesses, see me sell/slaughter. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha? You have to pay the 4 and 5 time penalty payment. So we'll say, so the chiddush over here in this part of the Mishnah, which is going to be the focus of our initial topic of the Gemara, is you have 2 separate sets of witnesses over here, right? In other words, in a classic case, there would be 1 set of witnesses who sees me steal and slaughter/sell. In this case, Group A sees me steal, Group B sees me slaughter/sell. Okay. Ganav u'machar b'Shabbos. Right. So let's say again, I stole the sheep and I sold it on Shabbos. Ganav u'machar la'avodah zara. Or I went ahead and I stole it and I sold it to avodah zara. It's not a Shabbos case. I stole it and I sold it to avodah zara. Ganav v'tavach b'yom kippurim. Or I will say I went ahead and I stole the sheep and I shechted it on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur. That's what happens when there's too long of a break between Musaf and Mincha. And I will say Ganav v'tavach b'yom kippurim. Ganav mishal aviv. The tavach umachar. Now, both say you're going to see. We're not going to get into these cases right now. We're going to go ahead and go through this in the Gemara. Both say essentially all of these cases we're going to see. There's competing liability. Like for example, the Yom Kippur case is the clearest one. Right? I stole. Now stealing on Yom Kippur, there's no heightened liability for stealing on Yom Kippur. Stealing is stealing. Shechting on Yom Kippur, technically speaking, is a chi of kares. So now both say, so now I've done two things. There's a chi of kares, but there's also financial liability. So remember, all of these cases that we're mentioning over here, the Gemara is going to talk about through the lens of kimle b'derabamine. That whenever you do one act, which results ultimately again in dual liability, one capital liability, one financial liability is set aside because, again, unfortunately, the person is going to be put to death. So we're going to see how all of these cases fit in. Ganav mishal aviv, v'tavach u'machar v'achar kach mesav. This was an interesting case. Over here, I stole my father's sheep, I slaughtered it and I sold it, and afterward the father died. So what's interesting about this case is after the father dies, who owns the sheep? The son thief. But technically speaking, again, the theft, slaughtering, selling occurred before the father died. Again, we'll see all these cases. Or again, I stole, I slaughtered, and then I was makdish. In all of these cases, mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. You still have to pay the 4 and 5 time penalty payment. Again, so we'll go through all of these cases in the Gemara. Gana v'tavach l'refuah l'klav. This is an interesting case. We'll say, let's say again, I stole a sheep and I slaughtered it, but for medicinal purposes. In other words, my intention wasn't to eat the meat. My intention was, I need the meat for medicinal purposes. Ol l'klavim. Or interestingly enough, I stole and I slaughtered, but it's not for human consumption. I was going to give it to my dogs. Or hashochet v'nimtzeis treifa. Or I steal the sheep, I shecht it, and it turns out the animal is a treifa. Or hashochet chulin ba'azara. Or I go ahead and shecht an unconsecrated animal in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. In all of these cases, mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. In all these cases, you'll still pay the 4 and 5 time penalty payments. Again, we're going to go through all of this in the Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel ever patters you ultimately again in the case of you shecht animal where it turns out to be a treifa, or you shecht chulin, unconsecrated animal in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. We're going to see that Rabbi Shimon holds shchita she'ena re'uya lo shma shchita. Any shchita that does not produce a kosher consumable animal is not called shchita. It's not called shchita. So if you shecht the animal and it's a treifa, right, ultimately again the animal is not fit for consumption. You shecht chulin ba'azara, not fit for consumption. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon is going to say there's no liability in those cases. Again, we'll see this in the Gemara. We'll say, let's focus on case number 1. Our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. What does Rabbi Akiva say? I will say, so remember again, what was the first case in the Mishnah? First case in the Mishnah was, I steal and I slaughter an animal. Now, we'll say, now what happened over here is, I went ahead and I steal the animal. First set of witnesses see me steal. Second set of witnesses see me slaughter and sell. Right? It's not and sell, because it's and or sell. Now we'll say, so now what happens is I have 2 sets of witnesses for again, one for theft, one for slaughter selling. So the Mishnah still said, even though there are 2 sets of witnesses, I am chayiv arba v'chamisha. I am chayiv the 4 and 5 time penalty payments. The Gemara says, our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Why not? Well, this is incredible. The Rabbi Akiva, ha'amar davar v'lo chatzi davar. We'll say Rabbi Akiva holds, now again, the pasuk is talking about eidos, api shnei edim or api shlosha edim yakum davar. Rabbi Akiva holds, will say that when the Torah speaks about testimony, the Torah says, based on the testimony of 2 witnesses, yakim davar. Now, what Rabbi Akiva says about that is, in order for testimony to be valid testimony, it has to be a complete testimony, not a partial testimony. So therefore, again, Rabbi Akiva would say something very interesting. Rabbi Akiva would say that in order to be chayiv, ultimately, again, arba v'chamisha, what has to happen? There has to be 1 set of witnesses both for the theft and for slaughter and selling. right? You can't have two sets of witnesses. Davar means witnesses have to testify about an entire testimonial unit or event unit. You can't have multiple sets of witnesses. Look at Rashi. Davar v'lo chatzi davar. Api shnayim edim yakum davar. V'hani edei tevicha diktani b'masnisin. O api shnayim edim acherim. Chatzi davar kames hadi. Dilav edei gneva ikalemer didei katavach. So let's listen to this. So in this case over here, where you have witnesses who testify that I stole, and a separate set of witnesses who say that I slaughtered. So neither set of witnesses is testifying about the entire event, which would make me liable. Because remember again, the witnesses that testify that I stole, okay, so that's that I stole. What's the halacha for theft? That's kefil. That's kefil. The witnesses who testified that I slaughtered, all they're testifying is that I slaughtered a sheep. For all they know, it could have been what? It could have been my sheep. Could have been my sheep. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva would decide. So what's interesting is that the Mishnah says there is liability, right? So the Mishnah says Allah Chalamayse, even if there are two sets of witnesses, there is liability. It doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. The saying, Am Rabbi Yossi, it's incredible. Kishahalach Abba Chalafta Eitzel Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Lilmod Torah. So this is Rabbi Yossi said as follows: When Abba Chalafta went Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri to learn Torah, V'amrilei Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Eitzel Abba Chalafta. Others say it was the opposite. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri went to Abba Chalafta on the days. Amarlo, he said to him, Harisha Achla, this is a very interesting case. Harisha Achla Shana Rishona Bifnei Shnayim, Shnia Bifnei Shnayim, Shlishis Bifnei Shnayim, Mahu. So Moshe said, listen to the following situation. Halacha l'maisa. If I live on a particular piece of land, and again, I live there for 3 years uncontested, and then Ruvain comes along in year number 3, or year number 4, and says, that's my property. That's my property. So we'll say the halacha is we do not believe Ruvain. Now, obviously, it presupposes that what? That Ruvain was present during those 3 years, knew and saw that I was living there. So obviously, if he did not oppose my residency during those 3 years, that I've created chazaka. So here was the shaila. What happens if you have 3 sets of witnesses? Year 1 witnesses that I lived there unopposed, year 2 witnesses, and year 3 witnesses. Can those 3 testimonial units combine to serve as my chazaka? So the Gemara says, Amarlo, harizu chazaka. So he said to him, yes, that works. That is a proper chazaka. Amarlo, afani omer kain, elish Rabbi Akiva cholik badavar. So he said to him, I also agree who the he is, either Abba Chalafta or Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. I also agree with that. But you know who disagrees with it? Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva omer davar, v'lo chatzi davar. Because we'll say ultimately again, Rabbi Akiva was the one who said davar v'lo chatzi davar. We'll say, but I just want to point out how beautiful this is. Rabbi Akiva's shita davar v'lo chatzi davar. We'll say, you know what did Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva said, in life, either do something completely or do not do it. Davar v'lo chatzi davar. Also remember again, how does Rabbi Akiva die? Right? Rabbi Akiva dies ultimately brutally at the hands of the Roman, scraping off his skin with iron combs. Remember, what does Rabbi Akiva do in his last moments? He says to his Talmidim, he says, my whole life, I always wondered, how will I be mekayim the pasuk of b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha? How will I go ahead and do that? How will I give myself over in totality to the Ribbon Shalom? And now, in these final moments, I recognize that I have the ability to literally give my life. You would think to yourself, Rabbi Akiva, that's what you're bothered by? How are you going to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha? That's what you're bothered by? Right? At the end of Rabbi Akiva, you do so much. Rabbi Akiva did a lot, but Rabbi Akiva always wanted more. That was the godless of Rabbi Akiva. Even when he was Rabbi Akiva, he was never content with the Rabbi Akiva he was. He always was focused on the Rabbi Akiva he could be. That's davar v'lo chatzi davar. Right? I will say, so often in life, we get to the chatzi davar mark, right? The halfway mark of whatever the life initiative is. And what happens? Gets the halfway mark. And how do you feel when you get to the halfway mark? It's pretty good. You know, I could dwell here. I could live here at the chatzi davar mark, right? I've gotten most of the job done, most of the initiative done. I'm doing pretty okay. I'm managing just enough. And I will say, you fill in the area where this is. Your relationship with Hashem, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your kids, your career, whatever you get to, I'm okay. I reached the chatzi davar mark. So when you reach the chatzi davar mark and you are ready to settle back, kick back, right, and relax in the world of mediocrity, just remember Rabbi Akiva. Davar v'lo chatzi davar. We do not settle for chatzi davar. We do not settle for okay in any area of life. We do not settle for the halfway mark in any area of life. Ultimately, like Rabbi Akiva, what do I aspire for? B'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha. At the end of the day, again, I don't always reach the finish line. I don't always reach the mark of totality. I'm not always able to settle into complete actualization. But at least I know that's what it is that I'm aiming for. So incredible that it's Rabbi Akiva who says this. The Gemara goes weiter. So therefore, again, Rabbi Akiva didn't like this residency halacha. So according to Rabbi Akiva, if you have 2 witnesses for year 1, 2 witnesses for year 2, 2 witnesses for year 3, that does not work. That does not work. You need 1 set of witnesses for all 3 years. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Amar Abaye, afilu tim Rabbi Akiva. So therefore, again, back to our Mishnah. So therefore, our Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Right? Because, again, remember, the Mishnah said that if I have 1 set of witnesses that saw me steal, and a 2nd set of witnesses that saw me slaughter, sell, that works. That I be chayiv arba v'chamisha. But by Pashas, according to Rabbi Akiva, you should need 1 set of witnesses for everything. So the Gemara says, not necessarily. Amar Abaye, afilu tim Rabbi Akiva. Not necessarily true. Our Mishnah can reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Why? Mila mod Rabbi Akiva v'shnayim omrim, kidesh, v'shnayim omrim bal. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Akiva agrees in the following case. Let's say 2 witnesses see that Rachel received kiddushin from Ruvain, and 2 other witnesses saw that Rachel had relations with Shimon. You've got a problem, right? Now we'll say, so now I have 2 sets of witnesses that, right? So 2 sets of witnesses about kiddushin, 2 sets of witnesses that Rachel had relations with a different man. So the afagav, the edebiyah tzrich, the ede kiddushin, we'll listen to this. Now, even though the edebiyah need the ede kiddushin, right? So the witnesses who saw that Rachel had relations ultimately again with Shimon, so their testimony is really irrelevant were it not for the first set of witnesses that she was makabel kiddushin from Ruvain, right? Because otherwise, witnesses saw that she had relations with Shimon. Okay, so what? So what? If she's an unmarried woman, again, not good, but Lamaisa certainly, again, not an Isser Misa. So the Gemara says, excuse me. So the Gemara says, the Eidei Bia Tzricha Eidei Kiddushin, so the Eidei Bia required the Eidei Kiddushin, but Kevan the Eidei Kiddushin lo Tzricha Eidei Bia, but I will say the Eidei Kiddushin don't need Eidei Bia. Now what does that mean? The Eidei Kiddushin, their testimony stands with or without the 2nd set. So therefore, again, davar karina bay. So therefore, we'll say that satisfies the criteria of davar. In other words, we'll say, here's what's interesting. What Abaye is suggesting is as follows. When does Rabbi Akiva, what's Rabbi Akiva's davar criteria? Davar criteria is, you can't have 2 sets of witnesses testifying about 2 separate things, neither of whom are giving testimony that could stand on its own. But when you have 2 sets of witnesses, Abaye is suggesting, one of the testimonies stands on its own. Just the other requires the first. That still satisfies the criteria of davar. So therefore, for example, if you have 2 witnesses giving testimony that Rachel's mikudeshes to Ruvain, and then 2 sets of witnesses that say Rachel had relations with Shimon, so I both say the first set of testimony, that stands on its own. It's just that the 2nd set of testimony requires the first. Rabbi Akiva says that's davar. That's davar. Therefore, again, halchanami, afagav de edei tvicha tzricha le'edei gneva. So we'll say, plugging this into our Mishnah, they will say, the witnesses who saw me shech the sheep, their testimony by itself is meaningless, right? They require the first set of witnesses, but however, but the first set of witnesses who testify that's what? That I stole a sheep, their testimony stands on its own. So therefore, because this testimony stands on its own, that's called davar. So we'll say an interesting qualification of the position of Rabbi Akiva. So when does Rabbi Akiva say davar velo chatzi davar? That's literally when you have 2 groups giving testimony, and neither testimony is meaningful without the other. Then Rabbi Akiva will say that it's irrelevant testimony. However, if you have 2 groups giving testimony, one group doesn't need the other group does need the other, that satisfies davar. That satisfies davar. Therefore, again, even in our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva would be okay. Why? Because the witnesses testifying about the theft, their testimony stands on its own. Just the witnesses testifying that I stole, that I sold it or slaughtered it, they require the first. So the first doesn't require the second requires the first. That they could still work beautifully in concert together to generate liability, even according to Rabbi Akiva. Hy'd davar v'lo chatzi davar l'mi'utei mai. So say, according to the Rabbanon, who don't hold like Rabbi Akiva, the Rabbanon do hold that two sets of witnesses could go ahead and two sets of witnesses can combine. So ultimately, again, but nevertheless, they also must reject chatzi davar in some way. What do they reject? L'mi'utei echad omer echad begaba ve'echad omer echad bekreisa. So we'll say, so listen to this. So let's say we know the signs of physical maturation that make a girl, a katan into a nara, is the presence of two hairs. Let's say you have two witnesses. One testifies about a hair on one part of her body, and one testifies about a hair on a second part of her body. So the Gemara says that would be an example of davar velo chatzi davar, right? Neither group is giving testimony ultimately, again, that is able to stand on its own. The Gemara says, come on, hai chatzi davar v'chatzi eidosu. But say that's not just chatzi davar, that's chatzi eidos. In other words, testifying that a girl has exhibited one hair as a sign of physical maturation is what? Is meaningless. Is meaningless. That's not a testimony. Elo lemi'ute shnaim omrim echad begaba u'shnaim omrim echad bekreisa. Rather, Rabbi Shmuel have to say, I'm sorry, the way we were framing the case was one witness says the hair was on one part of her body, and another witness was saying that the hair was on a different part of her body. That's meaningless. Why? Because you have one witness, one hair. That doesn't do anything. So what's the chatzi davar? The Gemara says, Shnaim omrim echad begaba, u'shnaim omrim echad bekreisa. So we'll say the example would be, let's say two witnesses testify about the presence of a hair on one part of her body, and another two witnesses testify about the presence of a hair on a different part of her body. That would be an example of chatzi davar. Hani amri kitanahi, v'hani amri kitanahi. We'll say because effectively they would both be saying that she's a kitana. Those are the kitanas. That would be the Rabbanon's example of chatzi davar. So we'll say saloch l'mais. What comes out of here is as follows. What comes out of here from the Mishnah is telling you that even if I have two sets of witnesses that testify that I stole, another set of witnesses that say that I slaughtered and sold, ultimately I'd be chayiv arba v'chamisha. That's the halacha in the Mishnah. Now the beauty of it is, the Gemara suggests, it even works according to Rabbi Akiva, who says davar v'lo chatzi davar. Why isn't this chatzi davar? Because I will say, essentially, according to Rabbi Akiva, as long as, whenever you have two sets of witnesses, as long as one testimonial unit is not reliant on the other, that's called davar. That's called davar. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's only called chatzi davar when everyone is allowed to. So, for example, in the case of where, let's say I'm living on a property for 3 years, and I have one set of witnesses for year 1, one set of witnesses for year 2, one set of witnesses for year 3. So, in that case, Rabbi Akiva would say that halacha l'maisa, the testimonies do not combine. Do not combine. Why not? Because halacha l'maisa, everyone is reliant on the other. But in this case over in the Mishnah, where the witnesses who testify about the theft, their testimony stands by itself, even without the guys who said that I slaughtered and sold. In that case, ultimately, again, they can combine. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Ganav v'machar b'Shabbos. So also the next case in the Mishnah was, now the Mishnah spoke about this idea that if I stole Ganav v'machar b'Shabbos, if I went ahead and I stole and I sold on Shabbos, ultimately, again, I'm chayiv arba v'chamisha. I'm chayiv ultimately, again, the 4 and 5 time penalty payment. So Rabbi says, the Gemara says, we learned that Hanya Potter. But 1 second, Rabbi say, we said that you're Potter. Right? All this is happening on Shabbos. So our Mishnah says that you're chayiv. And again, the logic being chayiv is what? What's the logic of being chayiv? Because again, I didn't do a malacha that would generate the death penalty. So there's no kimei b'derabimine. So therefore, if I stole and I sold, remember, it's not a case of slaughter. I stole and I sold on Shabbos. Ultimately, again, I'm going to be chayiv arba v'chamisha. The Gemara says that Tanya Potter, but we have another brisa that ultimately says that I am Potter. So Amrani Rachamo Kitanya Hy'd Potter, but Omer lo Aklutz Lechat Teina Miteinasi V'Tikni Ligenevasech. So we'll stop over here for today. I'll leave you a little bit on a cliffhanger. We'll pick up with this case tomorrow. So we're going to say, we'll say that the case that we're going to be dealing with is where the sale itself generated a biblical liability for Shabbos desecration. The details of that case, Emir Tzra will say, in the resolution between the Bryce and Mishnah, Emir Hashem tomorrow, Shkoyach. I will say, the two minyan Emir Hashem.